So I'm Christy Goldsmith Romero. I'm a commissioner at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and I also sponsor our Technology Advisory Committee.
And I'm Elizabeth Kelly. I'm Special Assistant to the President at the National Economic Council, where I lead our work on financial regulation and technology, including artificial intelligence.
So to get serious, right, it's been a breakout year for generative AI, or so we're told. McKinsey even went so far as to issue a report that was titled by a very similar name, which means it's true. But we really have been focusing pretty intensively on all the different use cases and all the different instances where AI is creeping into the conversation, and so excited to talk about it in the context of regulatory modernization. I did want to sort of touch on the fact that the last couple weeks have been especially involved, I'll say, as it relates to AI. We had the AI Safety Summit in Bletchley Park in the UK, and then of course, we have to talk about the EO. Having the EO out has been a real game changer and given many of us a framework for having this conversation, and in some ways given us a vocabulary we've all been craving. But the word safety has come up a lot. Safe, secure, and trustworthy has been on our lips a lot. If you woke up thinking, why do I feel like those words are ringing in my ears? It's because they're just sort of all we're talking about right now in the AI space. And so before we sort of go deep as you can go in the limited time we have as we talk about it in the context of regulatory modernization, we're hoping you could both just talk a little bit about sort of safe AI, responsible AI, and why that framing is really important.
So you're right, Sarah. The full name of the AIEO, or Old MacDonald EO, as some of my colleagues call it, is Advancing the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of AI. I did a Control F before coming here, and the word safe is in the EO 59 times, and responsible a mere 26. So I think it's great to take a step back and sort of say, okay, what do we mean by this? And I think about it a couple different ways. One is making sure that when we think about generative AI, the underlying foundation models are secure. From cyber attacks, the model weights are secured for the most powerful models, things like that. It also means that when we are deploying AI, we're using it in appropriate contexts. Not all AI systems make sense in all use cases. And within the use cases that do make sense, ensuring that we are promoting our values and protecting against risks while still enabling innovation to advance. The EO actually does a pretty good job of sort of outlining what our values are when we think about AI. It's things like protecting our national security from risks like biotechnology, cybersecurity, things like that. Promoting transparency and competition. Protecting civil rights and liberties. Protecting workers and consumers. And so those are all the different things that we think about when we think about responsible or safe AI.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said just rings true, the fundamental values. I mean, we've got a consequential technology here, right? There's a lot of promise, there's a lot of benefits we could have, but in order to achieve those in a way where we're not unleashing something, these bots, or some sort of peril, we have to have a guiding North Star. So we have these fundamental values that we look at, and along with some of the things that Elizabeth just said, right, we think about this idea of unbiased data that goes into it, which is really important. It also needs to be deployed in a way that that minimizes harm, right? If I think about, I'm a financial regulator, so I don't want AI-enabled market manipulation, fraud, things like that. And of course, in the financial world, you don't want, bias, disinformation. And ultimately, you need these models, or you need it to be designed and deployed in a way where the logic and the decision-making and the outcome is explainable and transparent and essentially audited by humans, so that we don't have the bots who are making all these decisions. And so that is all just part of these fundamental values to make sure that we have ethics and legal compliance and all of that wrapped around this technology so that we can have the benefits of it without all the risk.
No, so I think that's spot on, right? So the EO takes us through a number of principles. I think breaking it down in principles, we've heard about the virtues of having a principles-based approach, but having the EO sort of map out these 8 principles, the 7th of which, you know, if you're following on your bingo card, I think is like 2G of the EO, section 2G. It goes to the government's use of AI, and just because I don't have it memorized by heart yet, we're going to get there. That particular principle states, it's important to manage the risks from the federal government's own use of AI and increase its internal capacity to regulate, govern, and support responsible use of AI to deliver better results for Americans. And so, Elizabeth, I was hoping that you might talk to us a little bit about the many use cases, or some of the use cases, right, that are top of the mind right now from the federal government's perspective as a user of AI.
Absolutely. So I think it's worth noting the federal government is already using AI in lots of ways. In 2023, they did a survey of the agencies and found there were 700 use cases currently being deployed by agencies. For the real nerds among you, you can actually go download the spreadsheets on ai.gov if you're really bored one Saturday night. And they're really impressive use cases. It's things like predicting pandemics, identifying drug shortages, predicting extreme weather and being able to deploy timely and actionable notifications, thinking through how do you monitor the Earth's environment for NASA missions. Like, the lists go on. And we know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. As AI continues to evolve and grow, there will be more ways that we as the government can use AI to better serve the American people. Now, to be clear, AI is a tool, and it's not the right tool for every scenario, and so we have to sort of look at what our toolbox is per se. But I think that we know that there are ways we can improve government operations, improve customer service, deliver efficiencies, all of the sort of good government things that we so often talk about, as well as, you know, addressing critical social challenges like carbon capture and storage is one example that's thrown out. Drug discovery and development. Our mission is massive, and so the number of use cases. And so what we tried to do, both in the EO and in an even wonkier document, the OMB-M memo, is talk about how we as the federal government can do a better job of deploying AI. And that means removing barriers, be that inadequate infrastructure, lack of talent, needing additional data or data formatting, whatever the use case is, making sure that we're removing those barriers, speeding up the procurement of AI, so we're able to pull upon the best in the market, and most importantly, really having a whole of government talent surge. This is something in both the EO and in the MMO, using all of our existing programs, the U.S. Digital Service, Presidential Innovation Fellows, as well as considering, you know, direct accepted hiring authorities, new methods of recruiting, to make sure that we're bringing the best into government to help us tackle this mission, and, you know, training our own workforce on AI so everyone benefits.
So again, we don't know why Elizabeth is here. We don't know what she has to add to this conversation, and there's nothing that the federal government's been doing recently as it relates to AI. And so this EO is itself very undereducated and underinformed. Don't take that back. That's Chatham rules. I will say that I have a favorite line from the EO. I'm embarrassed to admit it. I'm gonna quote it the way that my teenager quotes Olivia Rodrigo, much to the chagrin of her sister, who's a Taylor Swift fan, which for those of you who don't appreciate, those are fighting words. But the EO says artificial intelligence presents both promise and peril. And so thinking about it, sort of that duality, Christy, as a regulator from where you're sitting, Is there anything sort of on that promise side of the ledger or peril side of the ledger that you're thinking about these days with respect to AI?
So I think it's two sides of one coin, right? So if you look at it, I get super excited about modeling. Like this idea of modeling for like climate risk or just financial stability risk, exposure, that's really hard to do, right? And so you think about that, but then you think about, okay, we've had in the past with the financial crisis models that had the wrong data, the wrong assumptions, right? But there's a lot of excitement, I think, about, I had just given a speech recently about the need for us to have climate financial risk scenarios by our largest players. That's really hard to do because the baseline of data is constantly changing as each year there's more storms or there's more wildfires, so the data becomes difficult. Could AI go and do that? But then you have the situation of, there's model risk. And one of the things that Gary Gensler recently also raises this idea of concentration in the AI industry, the generative AI industry, because it's so expensive to develop this. So will you end up having everyone using the same model? And then there's herd mentality, and then he says you could ultimately cause a financial crisis. Those are his words. So it's like, you have to sort of think about that. I think about a lot of promise in things like compliance, anti-money laundering, countering terrorist financing. So there's a lot there, but then there's also just the idea of improving efficiency, improving accuracy, improving transparency. So there's a lot of things like compliance related or regulatory reporting. And then you think, okay, well, some of this, we might be moving faster, like maybe you're going to settle trades faster. But are we losing something in those speed bumps? Is there going to be something that goes wrong or something that is actually inaccurate, and then it's too late and could have an impact on financial stability? So that's the way you're sort of looking at it. You're sort of saying, wow, there's a lot of great promise in some areas that, are difficult, like countering illicit finance, like doing model scenarios, climate risk scenarios, trying to find risk exposure. Can you use it in that way? But then what are the perils? And so then you have to think about, well, if here are the perils, what can I do to manage that risk?
And this is, of course, one instance where I think the conversations you're having and your thought process mirrors the conversations that are having in the private sector, right? Lots of discussions about what kind of unstructured data do we have? Are we using it well? Are we using it thoughtfully? Are there ways we can improve execution by relying on AI? But then, of course, what guardrails do we need? So, Elizabeth, thinking about the use cases that you laid out, we're going to have to design a song to help us all remember all the use cases. The question is, of course, how are we thinking about the guardrails? How does the federal government as a user think about those guardrails? And how, if at all, does that sort of embracing of the promise and peril help us lead on the global stage?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things we have to remember is that AI has been around for a while. It's been used by firms, it's been used by the government for many years, long before generative AI sort of burst onto the scene, or at least in the public imagination, this March. And a lot of those use cases are benign. Noise canceling headphones or auto-correcting in a text. Those are relatively, I don't want to say riskless, but pretty low risk. And so what we tried to do, both in the EO and the MMO, is differentiate between these lower risk use cases where we want to make sure that we are removing all the barriers and moving full speed ahead and deploying AI, versus those use cases that are impacting safety or rights. And what does that mean? So safety impacting could be, for example, using AI related to emissions or hazardous materials. The use of AI in relationship to critical infrastructure like dams or electrical grids, things that we really don't want to mess up. On the rights impacting side, it's when we think about things related to employment, related to government benefits, law enforcement, surveillance, anything where we know that we have to be especially careful to make sure that our use of AI has a human in the loop and is not in any way negatively impacting anyone's rights or safety. And so what we've done is sort of create a different process for government deployment in those instances. making sure that there are AI impact assessments before that happens, that there is public consultation and notice, that we have independent evaluations and monitoring. So we can just put those sort of extra speed bumps or safeguards in place when it's the most important. And especially for those use cases, I think we've really tried to live our values. So I'd call out sort of two particular ways that we've tried to do that. One is by making clear that when the government is procuring AI, it should be mindful of promoting competition. You talked about the concentration risks. The flip side of that is obviously the harms to competition. And so ensuring that we are not entrenching incumbents where possible, and we're considering pushing back against things like self-preferencing, making sure there's interoperability, using the government's power of the purse to promote a competitive ecosystem for AI. In addition, making sure that we have workers at the table. The president is very fond of saying he is the most pro-union president, and I think that's absolutely true. And one of the ways that you see that is when procuring AI and deploying it in the workplace, we've committed to make sure that unions, workers are at the table, and that's something that we hope more private sector partners will follow suit.
Okay, so Christy, as we wind up, because we're mindful of time, how do we think about regulatory modernization? What does that look like for agencies like the CFTC going forward, and is AI part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I love that as the U.S. we're leading here. I mean, that's really important, and we need to leave at the regulatory agency level too, right? We shouldn't be scared of technology. Otherwise, we would still be trading in the pits and not having electronic trading. And so that doesn't make any sense. And so the idea is like we have to keep pace as the government with technology so that we can understand what are the benefits, what are the appropriate use cases, what are the speed bumps, guardrails, consumer protections that we need to put in there. So, you said what I was saying sounded like some of the things that were being said in the private sector. Well, I, sponsor a technology advisory committee where I have technology experts, including two that were on the last panel, including experts in responsible AI, who advise us on this, and they go into sort of deep dive discussions. We've had 2 public meetings on this where we've discussed what are the values, what does responsible AI mean. But ultimately, an earlier panel said that regulators and government needs to get smarter on this. We are. I mean, we're sitting here smarter on this. This is not the first time Elizabeth and I have met each other, right? I mean, these are things we're talking about, we're very actively engaged in, and I think that's the way we keep pace. That's what regulatory modernization means.
So I think we can all agree that the perspective that the federal government has as a function of being a user has value. It changes the conversation, it changes the engagement. I think it really changes a lot about this space. So to force you into a yes or no answer, because it's my favorite thing to do, because we all like open-ended answers. Yes or no, do you each think that it's right for us to continue to press the federal government to be an avid adopter of AI?
I mean, I'll say yes, fraud and surveillance.
Yes, we need to lead by example and use every tool at our disposal to better serve the American people.
Okay, so I didn't force anyone into an answer that was uncomfortable for them, and I think it's a pretty predictable answer. But softballs are important, particularly this time of day. So we just want to thank you all, thank Phil, thank AFC for allowing us to nudge this conversation forward. It's been a real pleasure, and any excuse I have to be with Christy and Elizabeth is, a treat. So thanks.
Thank you.